So, good evening, everybody. To begin the Dhamma talk, normally I would be chanting the homage, the refuges, and the precepts, but I want to jump right in tonight and to say that I was really touched by what you were speaking of today, those of you who were in the small groups today. Speaking of, in terms of the practice, what you're experiencing already. Just a couple of days in, there's a lot of practice going on. It's very touching. And some really clear expressions of the challenges of this practice and how different the Upekkha practice feels as compared to the other Brahma Viharas. And just to reiterate, to say again what I said already this morning and last night, when we cultivate Upekkha, the wisdom factor is in the foreground. So instead of the well-wishing being in the foreground, it's a space of wisdom. We're unhooking from reactivity. We're unhooking from any form of grasping or preferences. And to the extent that we've been using a subtle attached connection to cultivate the other three Brahma Viharas, we'll see it with this. And it can be very easy in the other Brahma Viharas to become quite hooked by the pleasant, open-hearted feeling of connection with another person, and hooked by the subtle attachment underlying that. There's identification there. There's me and the other person. The opposite of identification isn't a void of nothingness. The opposite of identification is not grasping. So it's quite wonderful. You're already seeing this in the practice. You might not think it's wonderful, but I think it's wonderful. And I want to speak more tonight about training and purification, because this Upekkha practice is a real reality check, as I said before. So maybe we've cultivated quite a bit of metta and maybe some compassion and mudita as well. Maybe we're used to a certain kind of experience in those practices. And maybe there's a real ease of connection. We come to the Upekkha practice, and that ease of connection, what is it rooted in? We get to find out. Are they rooted in some sense of identification, some sense of a story, some sense of attachment, or not? This is not welcome, actually, when it happens. If we find out, oh, that was just attachment. But it's really wonderful, actually, because how much better to see identification and not pretend it isn't there than to avoid it. Just as when we mature in the Vipassana practice and we get to see all the places where we've been clinging, so with this practice, as we move into Upekkha, we get to see all of that in the context of a relationship. We see reactivity in relationship, either subtle or gross. And we see the kind of reactivity that we've avoided or bypassed or dismissed as unimportant.
Che ci sembrava non fosse importante.
The Upekkha practice shows this much more vividly than the other Brahma Viharas. And we also see the habits we have around other people that are based in these, especially habits that are based in kind of false equanimity in that near enemy. So habits of being agreeable all the time, even if we don't feel that way. Habits of suppressing reactivity and pretending, oh, I'm okay with that. So it's a very uncomfortable practice, more so even than the others. And as we go through the different categories of people, we go deeper and deeper and deeper into the equanimity ocean. So as we go from category to category, we find balance in this new, slightly more difficult category, just as with the metta or the karuna or the mudita. And then after we find the balance, we go to the next category and the next and the next. And just like in the metta practice, each category elicits a certain category of unwholesome mind state that might be lurking under the surface. So from now on in the practice, we'll go through categories, the sequence of which will be quite familiar to you. The main difference in the Upekkha category, as you've noticed, is we take the neutral person to be the first, and we take ourselves to be the last. So one very practical thing to say here about that is if you find yourself really struggling and you feel like you need to cultivate a Brahma Vihara towards yourself, don't try at this point to cultivate Upekkha. Cultivate metta instead. There's no need to be in a hurry with this practice because it cannot, like every practice, it really cannot be rushed. We'll go through all the categories in this retreat in a bit of a hurry. But what this will show you is where you stick the most, where it's most sticky and most difficult. So that if you want to explore this practice on your own later, you can spend much more time there. And starting where it's easy, we take equanimity that is quite tender and new, and we develop it. And we develop access or the ability to easily access it while facing all of this habitual reactivity that might be coming up. And as you remember from last night, the opposite of equanimity is any form of attachment or aversion. So seeing arisen attachment and aversion, seeing arisen agendas and things that we hang on to, this is the fuel of this practice. And as you know, we work with these states in a very different way than we do in Vipassana. The practice is simply to put them aside and incline instead to Upekkha, which is not to say we try to suppress them. That's not the point. We just let them be there and we do not feed them by thinking about them, trying to understand them, trying to make them go away. And what we're essentially working with here when we work with all these things that get in the way of Upekkha is we're working with clinging and identification. A Pali scholar in the United States has a lovely way of putting the relationship between self and identification. Grasping is not something done by a self, but rather self is something done by grasping. But rather, self is something done by grasping. The same applies, of course, to aversion. So when there's aversion, when there's grasping, there's always identification. And this is extremely sticky. There's a sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya that likens, has a metaphor it's really quite painful to read of how attachment is like a monkey trapped by a hunter by like sticky sap. Sap, the sticky, like rubbery sap that comes out of a tree.
Okay.
And it's possible to trap small animals by plant resin. And so this metaphor is just quite amazing. The Buddha says it's like there's this very curious monkey, but foolish. And he puts one hand in the sap and it gets stuck. And then he tries to free it with the second hand, and that gets stuck. And he tries the third hand and the fourth hand, and pretty soon the mouth, and he's stuck 5 ways. And these 5 ways, it's seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, the 5 senses. And we attach to sense objects and we call them ours. This is an extra level of stickiness. So there's a nice sense object and we like it. It belongs to us. And then we get protective of it. There's a lot of trouble that comes from this. I'm sure you all know your own examples, but you see it in the world all the time. It's not so benign as just, oh, this is my nice water bottle. Isn't it pretty? No, it's something much more poisonous than that. So the relationship of craving and aversion and the relationship of those two and identification, it becomes very clear in this practice. And we get to see all the ways these things play out in our actual experience with other beings. The Upekkha practice, as I've said, has wisdom in the foreground. So this is another doorway into the wisdom we acquire in Vipassana practice when we see things clearly, the wisdom that lets go. However, the practice affects or creates letting go in a very, very different way than does Vipassana. We simply incline to it over and over and over again, whether the mind is full of greed or not. So this is a concentration practice. And there's nothing we need to do or see about the attachment, except to understand it's unwholesome, useless, leading to suffering. And then we just turn away from it and focus instead on the upekkha. The purification that comes with this practice is not a purification of uprooting these states of mind, but rather it's gaining skill in letting go. And that skill in letting go is something that we can directly apply to our Vipassana practice. So one of the things that's very helpful in this practice is to understand the danger of attachment. So when we understand the suffering that is caused by something, it's easier to just put it down and cultivate something else. So in the Anguttara Nikaya, there's a really kind of intense passage where the Buddha is talking about the things that are rooted in craving. So the 9 things rooted in craving, this is the Anguttara 9:23. So independence or depending on craving, there's seeking. Independence on seeking, there's gain. Independence on gain, there's an assessing of, oh yes, this is good, I want more of it. Independent on this assessing is desire and lust, fed by thought. Independence on this desire and lust is a strong conviction of I and mine. So attachment, identification. So in dependence on this attachment, there's possessiveness. And I think of this possessiveness as that strong clinging that is about mine. So think of Gollum in The Lord of the Rings. So independence on this possessiveness, then comes selfishness, miserliness, not wanting to share what is mine. And then, of course, in dependence on that, there's safeguarding, building walls around things. And then the Buddha says, with safeguarding, this safeguarding as a basis and a foundation, there come to be the taking up of weapons, quarrels, arguments, disputes, accusations, divisive and false speech, and many other bad and unwholesome things. You might wonder why I'm laughing here. It's because we're all familiar with this. Mine, and you can't have it. This is so familiar. And think of your relationship with your neighbors. This plays out, doesn't it? Mine. And control of mine. It's really suffering. And, this is so obvious in everyday life. We don't even pay much attention to. And what the Buddha taught, and what's so humbling, is how this makes us all look crazy. It makes us do things that we'd really rather not do. So this equanimity practice goes right to the root of that and teaches us how both to see all of this and to not follow it. One of the difficult phases in this practice is what almost feels like rebellion. Our habits of identification, our habits of liking and disliking fight back. And we're much more adept at feeding the liking and disliking than we are at letting it go. There's a sutta in the Digha Nikaya where the king of the gods comes and asks the Buddha some questions. The king of the gods, you'd think, here's somebody who's living in a very ethereal realm. And what he's asking the Buddha at the outset is, what binds beings? What keeps us trapped? And it's a long sutta, so I won't read it, but the piece that I find most interesting is liking and disliking that arise from sense contact are the root, when they're not seen, of identification. And what this is fed by is papancha, which is proliferation, mental proliferation, thinking. So, have you had any thought today about liking and not liking? I don't know about any of you, but I certainly have. And in the practice, when things come up, often the mind chews on it in a particularly vivid way. This chewing on it's just like a cow chewing on her cud. Yeah, we say rumination in English too. It's like, ugh, we just can't let go of something. This is a habit. And sadly, often when we're thinking about these things, we're trying desperately to let them go. And we think that thinking about them will do that. Whereas in fact, what we're doing is actually feeding them. So those of you who have a habit in the practice of thinking about or reflecting about things that come up, please know that you're actually feeding those things, not figuring them out. And this kind of rumination, this reflection about difficult states is undone by right effort. Specifically in this practice, what right effort looks like is that constant inclination to upekkha. It's very, very simple. What we're doing when we're continually inclining the mind with the phrase is unhooking from those unwholesome mind states, from that attachment, from that aversion, from that identification. And what the instructions are so clear about is what we're developing is a constancy of that inclination. So again and again and again. So whether that phrase kind of lands or not, whether we can really feel into that connection, it actually doesn't matter. What we're doing is planting seeds. By unhooking over and over and over again, we're creating a momentum of movement of the mind. And what can happen, and a couple of you have already mentioned this, quite spontaneously, there is this balance that comes in the mind, a spaciousness. This can be quite disconcerting because we're not used to it. We're used to identification, we're used to clinging, we're used to aversion. And so there's this space that opens up in the heart and about beings that we don't quite know what to do with. And it can cause a response of doubt. It's like, oh, is this, yeah, I'm not sure about this. Is this what I'm supposed to be cultivating? This feels really weird. Or, ooh, I don't like this. The mind reacts about it. I'd rather have the juiciness of attachment. It's kind of sad, but it's pretty common, actually, this response. So should this happen in your practice, please don't worry. When there's a sense of connection with the person, but it just feels like there's so much space in there. So this arises naturally by itself. And a couple of people have mentioned already, it's like, oh, suddenly, yeah, this is natural, actually. This sudden arising of this state of balance. Instead of being trapped like the monkey on the branch with attachment and aversion, we can go wherever we like. The practice will get harder as we go on. Please don't worry. It's because of this training and because of the exposure of all these states that happens more and more as we go deeper into the practice, that it becomes more challenging. It's a different kind of difficulty that we experience than the kind we experience at first, or we're just not sure how, what is this? Is this kamasaka, kamasaka, kamasaka? I don't get this. That's the kind of difficulty we've been having in the last day or so. As we go deeper in the practice, the kind of difficulty we'll be having is more about attachment, aversion, and stories. So it becomes a practice of learning how to just put those aside and continue with the practice. So it's an interesting journey with a capital I, but it's a very fruitful one. It's worth all of the challenge. Already some of you are reporting the amazing relief and the spaciousness of this. That only gets better. So with the difficulty comes great opening. That's the purification. Yeah. So I'll stop here. And thank you for your kind attention, everybody. Continuing with the practice tonight. And really be persistent but gentle with yourselves. Cultivating your continuity of inclination. Thank you, everybody, for your kind attention, and I wish you a good evening.